My name is Jordan Callahan, and I'm 28 years old and 8 months pregnant with my first child. And 3 weeks ago, my mother-in-law threw me a baby shower that turned into the most humiliating and then most vindicating moment of my entire life. I should start by explaining that my relationship with my mother-in-law, Patricia, has always been difficult. From the moment my husband, Mark, introduced us 4 years ago, she made it clear that I wasn't good enough for her son. I'm not from money. My family is working class. My dad's a plumber and my mom's a hairdresser. I put myself through community college and then state university to get my teaching degree. I work as a third-grade teacher, and I love my job, but it's not prestigious or high-paying. Mark, on the other hand, comes from wealth. His family owns a successful pharmaceutical company. They live in a mansion in the nicest part of town. They vacation in Europe and have a beach house in the Hamptons. And Patricia has never let me forget that I married up. When Mark and I got engaged, Patricia actually tried to talk him out of it. I overheard her telling him he could do so much better, that he should marry someone from their social circle, someone with connections and breeding. Yes, she actually used the word breeding like we were horses. Mark defended me and told his mother that he loved me and was going to marry me whether she approved or not. We had a small wedding because, frankly, I couldn't afford anything big, and Mark's parents refused to contribute since they didn't support the marriage. Patricia showed up to the wedding in a black dress like she was attending a funeral. She spent the entire reception making passive-aggressive comments about how small the venue was and how simple the decorations were. It was clear she thought her son had made a huge mistake. The marriage has been good despite Patricia's constant interference. Mark is kind and supportive, and he tries to shield me from his mother's worst behavior. But it's been a constant source of tension. Patricia calls multiple times a day. She shows up at our house unannounced. She criticizes everything from how I keep house to what I cook to how I dress. When we announced we were pregnant, she had a very strange reaction. She seemed almost suspicious. She asked Mark multiple times if he was sure the baby was his. She made comments about how quickly I'd gotten pregnant after we started trying, as if that was somehow evidence of infidelity. Mark told her to stop, but she just kept making little digs. As my pregnancy progressed, Patricia's comments got worse. She'd say things like, "I hope the baby looks like Mark so we know it's really a Callahan." Or, "Are you sure about your due date because the timing seems off?" Or, "I've heard that some women try to trap men with pregnancy." I was hurt and angry, but I tried to ignore her for Mark's sake. He was excited about becoming a father, and I didn't want to ruin that by forcing him to choose between his mother and me. I figured once the baby was born and Patricia saw that the child was obviously Mark's, she'd calm down, and maybe we could have a better relationship. I was trying to be patient and understanding, even though she was making me miserable. When I was about 6 months pregnant, Patricia announced that she wanted to throw me a baby shower. I was surprised because she'd never shown any interest in celebrating me or my pregnancy. But Mark said his mother was trying to make an effort, and I should let her. He thought maybe this was her way of accepting me and the baby, so I agreed. Patricia said she'd handle everything and I just needed to show up. She said it would be a big event because the Callahan family has a lot of friends and business associates who'd want to celebrate the new baby. I told her I preferred something small and intimate, but she waved me off and said, "Nonsense. This baby is a Callahan, and we celebrate big." The baby shower was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at a fancy event venue. Patricia had invited over 200 people, most of whom I'd never met. There were her society friends and country club members and business associates from the pharmaceutical company. My own friends and family were there too, but they were definitely in the minority. The venue was decorated elaborately with expensive flowers and fancy linens, and a dessert table that looked like it cost more than my monthly salary. There was a photographer and a videographer to document everything. It was way more extravagant than I'd wanted, but I tried to be grateful that Patricia was putting in effort. I arrived at the baby shower with Mark and my parents. I was wearing a maternity dress that I thought was nice, but I could see Patricia looking at it with disapproval. She greeted us at the door and immediately started directing me around like I was a prop in her event rather than the guest of honor. She had me stand in specific places for photos. She told me what to say when people asked about the pregnancy. She was completely controlling the entire thing. I felt uncomfortable, but I was trying to be gracious. My mom whispered to me, "Are you okay with all this?" And I said, "I'm fine. It's just for a few hours." The shower started with mingling and refreshments. People I didn't know kept coming up to me asking invasive questions about my pregnancy and my relationship with Mark. Several of Patricia's friends made comments about how young I looked or how they were surprised Mark had married a teacher. The condescension was palpable. My friends stayed close to me and tried to run interference, but there were so many of Patricia's people that we were completely outnumbered. Mark was off talking to his father and some business associates. I kept trying to catch his eye to signal that I needed support, but he was engrossed in conversation. After about an hour, Patricia announced that it was time for the main event. She had a microphone and a small stage area set up. She called me up to the stage and had me sit in a decorated chair that looked almost like a throne. She said we were going to play some games and then open presents. The games were typical baby shower stuff, guessing the baby's measurements, baby bingo, nothing too bad. But then Patricia said she had one more special activity planned. She said, "Before we celebrate this new addition to the Callahan family, I think it's important that we address something." My stomach dropped because her tone had changed. It was cold and almost cruel. Patricia reached down beside the stage and pulled up a small box. She held it up and said, "This is a paternity test kit. I want Jordan to take it right now in front of everyone, so we can be absolutely certain that this baby is really Mark's before we waste time and resources celebrating a child that might not even be a Callahan." The room went completely silent, 200 people staring at me. I felt like I'd been slapped. I looked at Mark, who was standing at the edge of the crowd, and his face was white. He looked shocked, but he wasn't moving, wasn't saying anything. Patricia continued saying, "A mother knows when something is off, and I've had concerns about this pregnancy from the beginning. The timeline didn't quite add up, and Jordan has been very evasive about certain things. So I think we all deserve to know the truth." I sat there frozen, humiliated, 8 months pregnant in front of 200 people who were now all wondering if I'd cheated on my husband. My mother stood up and said this is completely inappropriate. And Patricia said, if Jordan has nothing to hide, then she shouldn't mind taking the test. Several of Patricia's friends nodded in agreement. I heard whispers spreading through the crowd. I saw people taking out their phones to record this. I looked at Mark again, and he was just standing there. He still hadn't said anything to defend me, hadn't told his mother to stop. He was looking at the floor, and I realized with horror that he'd known this was going to happen. Patricia had told him her plan, and he'd agreed to it, or at least hadn't stopped it. I felt tears starting, and I forced them back because I refused to cry in front of these people. I refused to give Patricia the satisfaction. I stood up slowly, my hand on my pregnant belly, and I said, "Okay, Patricia, you want to talk about DNA tests? Let's talk about DNA tests." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I'd been carrying something with me for the past few weeks because I'd suspected Patricia might try something, though I never imagined it would be this public and this cruel. I said, "Before I agree to take a paternity test, I think there's something you should know. I think everyone here should know, actually, since you've made this such a public spectacle." I pulled up a file on my phone, and I said, "A few months ago, Mark, and I decided to do one of those ancestry DNA tests for fun. You know, the ones where you send in your saliva, and they tell you about your ethnic background and connect you with relatives. I thought it would be interesting to see what our baby might inherit. Mark did one, and I did one. And when the results came back, there was something very interesting in Mark's results. Patricia's face had gone from smug to uncertain. She said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, the ancestry test shows you your DNA matches with relatives who have also taken the test." And Mark's results showed several matches on his father's side. Cousins and distant relatives, all connected to Richard's family line. That all made sense, but there was something strange. There were no DNA matches at all on what should be his mother's side. I let that hang in the air for a moment while people processed what I was saying. Patricia said that doesn't mean anything. Maybe none of my relatives have taken the test. And I said that's what I thought at first too, so I did some digging. I contacted the testing company and asked them to clarify. They explained that Mark shares 0 DNA markers with you, Patricia. 0, which is impossible if you're his biological mother. A child shares 50% of their DNA with each parent. So if Mark has 0 matches to your family line and 0 genetic markers that match you, That means you're not his biological mother." The room erupted, people gasping and whispering. Patricia's face had gone completely white. She said, "That's ridiculous. That test must be wrong." And I said so. I had Mark do a second test with a different company to be sure, same results. And then just to be absolutely certain, I had a proper maternity test done at a medical lab. I held up an envelope that I pulled from my purse. "This is the official medical maternity test between you and Mark. It confirms with 99.9% certainty that you are not his biological mother." Patricia grabbed the envelope from me and ripped it open. Her hands were shaking as she read the results. People were standing up trying to see. The photographer was still taking pictures. The videographer was capturing everything. Mark had pushed through the crowd and was standing at the stage looking between me and his mother. He said, "What is she talking about? Mom, what is this?" And Patricia said, "I don't know. This has to be wrong. I gave birth to you, I'm your mother." And I said, "The test doesn't lie. You're not his biological mother," which means one of two things. Either Mark was switched at birth, which seems unlikely given he was born at a private hospital with extensive security, or you're not the woman who gave birth to him. You adopted him, or you're raising someone else's child. Mark's father, Richard, had made his way to the stage. His face was red and he looked furious. He said, "What the hell is going on?" And I said, "I'm telling you what I found out when we did those ancestry tests. Mark is not Patricia's biological son." Richard grabbed the test results from Patricia and read them. His face changed from angry to shocked to something else, something that looked almost like guilt. And I realized he knew, Richard knew something. Patricia was saying, "This is impossible. I gave birth to you. I was there, I remember." And Richard said, "Patricia," and his voice was quiet. She turned to him and said, "What?" And he said, "We need to talk about this privately." And she said, "No. No, you tell me right now in front of everyone since Jordan has decided to make this public." Richard looked around at the 200 people all staring at him, all holding their phones up recording, and he seemed to make a decision. He said, "Fine. You want the truth. Mark is not your biological son. You couldn't get pregnant. We tried for years and it wasn't working. I had an affair with my secretary, Linda. She got pregnant. I convinced her to let us raise the baby as ours. I told her we could give the child a better life. We paid her a significant amount of money, and she signed away her parental rights. You were pregnant at the same time with a different child, but you had a miscarriage in your second trimester. You were devastated. We were going to tell you about the affair baby, but then I thought, why not just pretend that baby was yours? You were so destroyed by the miscarriage, and here was a baby that was at least half mine. So I told you that the baby survived, that the doctors had been wrong. And you were so drugged up and emotional that you believed me. Linda gave birth a week after your miscarriage, and I brought Mark home and told you he was yours." The room had gone from shocked whispers to complete chaos. People were shouting questions. Patricia had collapsed into a chair. She was shaking and saying, "No, no, that's not possible. I raised him. I'm his mother." And Richard said, "You are his mother in every way that matters. You raised him. You love him. But biologically, he's Linda's son." Mark was standing there looking like his entire world had collapsed. He said, "Who is Linda? Where is she?" And Richard said, "She died about 10 years ago. Car accident. She never contacted us after we took Mark. She kept the agreement." Mark said, "So my entire life is a lie. Everything I thought I knew about myself is wrong." And Richard said, "You're still my son. That's real. I'm your biological father." And Mark said, "And what about her?" He pointed at Patricia. "She's not even related to me. And she's spent my entire life controlling me. And now she just publicly humiliated my pregnant wife because she's so obsessed with bloodlines and family legacy when she's not even actually family." Patricia was crying now, ugly sobbing. She said, "I didn't know. I thought you were mine. I loved you as my own." And Mark said, "But you're not my mother. My actual mother was Dad's secretary who he paid off and who's been dead for 10 years. Patricia reached for Mark and he stepped back. He said, "Don't touch me. You just tried to humiliate Jordan in front of 200 people. You accused her of infidelity. You demanded a paternity test at her baby shower. And the whole time you weren't even my real mother. The hypocrisy is unbelievable." Patricia said, "I thought I was protecting the family, protecting the Callahan name." And Mark said, "What Callahan name? I'm not even a Callahan. I'm the son of a secretary Dad had an affair with. There is no precious bloodline to protect." I stood there watching this all unfold. I felt vindicated, but I also felt terrible because I'd just destroyed this family. I'd exposed secrets that maybe should have stayed buried. But then I remembered Patricia standing there with that paternity test demanding I prove myself in front of everyone. Remembered Mark standing silently while his mother humiliated me. And I didn't feel quite so bad anymore. My mother came up on stage and put her arm around me and said, "Let's get you out of here." And I nodded. I looked at the crowd and I said, "I'm sorry you all came to celebrate a baby and instead witness this. But I want to make something very clear. My baby is Mark's. I have never cheated on my husband. I have been nothing but faithful and devoted, and I will not be accused of infidelity by a woman who has been lying about her own son's parentage for 28 years. Thank you for the gifts. We'll be leaving now." I walked off the stage with my mother. My dad was gathering our things. My friends had already left after the chaos started. Mark was still standing there arguing with his father. Patricia was being comforted by some of her society friends who looked absolutely thrilled to have this gossip to share. I made it to the car, and that's when I finally broke down crying. My mom held me and said, "You did what you had to do, honey. She tried to destroy you and you defended yourself." And I said I just destroyed their entire family. And she said no. Richard destroyed that family 28 years ago when he had an affair and lied about it. You just exposed the truth. Mark came home about 3 hours later. I was in bed having cried myself into exhaustion. He sat down next to me and said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't defend you. I'm sorry I let my mother do that to you. I didn't know she was going to demand a paternity test publicly. She told me she wanted to have a private conversation with you about some concerns, but I never imagined this. And I said you should have shut it down the second she brought out that test kit. You stood there and said nothing while she accused me of cheating in front of 200 people, and he said I was in shock. I couldn't believe what was happening, and I said neither could I, Mark. Neither could I. He said, "I've been thinking about those DNA results. When did you find out?" And I said about 6 weeks ago when we got the ancestry results back. I saw you had no maternal matches, and I started investigating. I contacted the testing company. I had the additional tests done. I wanted to understand what was going on before I said anything. Mark said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I said honestly because I wasn't sure how you'd react. Your mother has so much influence over you, and I was afraid you'd either not believe me or you'd tell her, and she'd find some way to spin it or bury it. I was going to tell you after the baby was born when we were more stable. But then your mother decided to publicly humiliate me, and I defended myself the only way I could. Mark said my whole life is a lie. I don't even know who I am anymore, and I said, "You're still you. You're still the man I married. You're still going to be a father. This doesn't change who you are as a person." And he said, "It changes everything. My mother isn't my mother. I have a biological mother I'll never meet. My father had an affair and lied about it. My entire understanding of my family is wrong." And I said, "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I'm sorry it happened so publicly. If your mother hadn't tried to humiliate me, I would have found a private way to tell you, but she forced my hand." He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "I need some space. I need to process this. I'm going to stay at a hotel for a few days." And I said, "Okay, I understand." And he left. And I was alone in our house 8 months pregnant, having just blown up my husband's entire family. I felt awful, but I also felt this strange sense of peace. I'd been carrying the weight of that DNA secret for weeks, terrified of what would happen when the truth came out. And now it was out, and yes, it was messy and painful, but at least it was the truth. The next few days were chaos. The video of the baby shower confrontation went viral on social media. Someone had posted it, and it had been shared thousands of times. People were commenting about karma and justice, and how Patricia got what she deserved. There were think pieces about mother-in-law relationships and family secrets and DNA testing. I was getting messages from strangers, some supportive, and some calling me cruel for exposing the truth so publicly. Patricia's friends were apparently divided. Some thought she'd gotten what she deserved for her cruelty, and others thought I'd been vindictive and should have handled it privately. The story even made it to some tabloid websites. Wealthy pharmaceutical family torn apart by DNA test revelation. Mark stayed at the hotel for 4 days, and during that time, I had several long conversations with my parents and my therapist about everything that had happened. My therapist helped me understand that I'd been put in an impossible position. Patricia had publicly attacked my character and integrity. I defended myself with the truth. The fact that the truth was devastating wasn't my fault. It was the result of decades of lies from Richard and Patricia. My dad said he was proud of me for standing up for myself, even when it was hard. My mom said she wished it hadn't happened that way, but she understood why I'd done it. When Mark finally came home, he looked exhausted. He said he'd been thinking about everything, and he'd talked to a therapist, and he understood why I'd done what I did. He said he was hurt that I hadn't told him about the DNA results sooner, but he understood I was trying to protect him. He said he was angry at his parents for lying to him his whole life, angry at his mother for how she'd treated me, angry at his father for having the affair and creating this whole mess. He said he wanted to try to work through this together, for our baby's sake and for our marriage. I said I wanted that too, but things had to change. He couldn't let his mother have so much influence over our lives anymore. He needed to set boundaries and protect me and our child, and he agreed. Mark confronted his parents a few days later. I wasn't there, but he told me about it afterward. He told Patricia that her behavior toward me had been unacceptable for years, and the baby shower stunt was the final straw. He told her that she was going to have limited access to our child unless she could prove she'd changed and could treat me with respect. Patricia apparently broke down crying and said she'd only been trying to protect him. And Mark said, protect me from what? From my wife, who's been nothing but good to me. From my child. You weren't protecting me, you were trying to control me. He told Richard that he needed time and space to process everything, and he wasn't sure when or if they'd have a relationship again. The pharmaceutical company apparently went into damage control mode because the scandal was affecting their reputation. Richard ended up stepping down from his position as CEO. Whether he was forced out or chose to leave, I don't know. Mark inherited some company stock, but he wanted nothing to do with the day-to-day operations. Patricia basically became a social pariah. Her society friends distanced themselves because the scandal was too juicy and too embarrassing. The country club was apparently buzzing with gossip for weeks. I almost felt bad for her, but then I remembered her standing on that stage, holding that paternity test kit and demanding I prove myself, and my sympathy evaporated. Our daughter was born 5 weeks after the baby shower disaster. She's beautiful and perfect, and she's definitely Mark's. Not that there was ever any doubt, but we did end up doing a paternity test just to have official documentation since Patricia had made such public accusations. The test confirmed what I already knew. Mark is her father. We named her Emma after my grandmother, and she's the best thing that ever happened to us. Becoming parents has actually strengthened our relationship. Mark has been stepping up and being the partner and father I knew he could be. He set firm boundaries with his parents, and he's prioritizing our little family. Patricia asked to meet Emma when she was 2 weeks old. Mark and I discussed it and decided to allow supervised visits. She came to our house, and she was much more subdued than I'd ever seen her. She held Emma and cried and apologized to both of us. She said she'd been wrong about so many things. Wrong to treat me badly. Wrong to doubt me. Wrong to make that horrible scene at the baby shower. She said finding out she wasn't Mark's biological mother had been devastating, but it had also made her realize how much she'd taken for granted. She'd spent Mark's whole life trying to control him and mold him into what she thought a Callahan should be when she should have just loved him for who he was. She said she hoped she could have a relationship with Emma and with us, but she understood if we didn't trust her. I told Patricia that trust has to be earned and it would take time. I told her that her behavior over the years had hurt me deeply, and the baby shower incident was traumatic. I said if she wanted to be in Emma's life, she needed to respect me as Mark's wife and as Emma's mother. She needed to stop trying to control everything, and she needed to sincerely work on changing her behavior. Patricia agreed to go to therapy and to work on herself. She's been making an effort. She asks before coming over. She doesn't criticize me constantly. She treats me with more respect. It's not perfect, but it's better, and I'm willing to give her a chance for Emma's sake and for Mark's sake. Richard has been less involved. He's dealing with his own fallout from the affair revelation and the company situation. Mark talks to him occasionally, but their relationship is strained. Mark is working through his feelings about his biological mother, Linda. He's sad he'll never get to know her. He's angry his father kept her existence a secret. He's processing a lot of complicated emotions about his identity and his family. But he's doing it with the help of a good therapist and with my support. As for me, I'm healing from the trauma of that baby shower. I still have moments where I think about standing on that stage 8 months pregnant being accused of infidelity in front of 200 people. I still feel the humiliation and anger. But I also feel proud that I defended myself. Proud that I didn't let Patricia destroy me. I exposed the truth. And yes, it was messy and painful, but it was necessary. Patricia needed to be held accountable for her cruelty and her hypocrisy. And the Callahan family needed to stop living a lie. I've learned a lot from this experience. I've learned that sometimes you have to fight back even when it's uncomfortable. I've learned that keeping the peace isn't worth sacrificing your dignity. I've learned that the truth will set you free even if it's painful. And I've learned that family secrets have a way of coming out eventually, and it's better to deal with them honestly than to build your life on lies. My mother-in-law threw me a baby shower and then demanded a paternity test in front of everyone. And I pulled out his paternity test showing he's not her son. It was the most dramatic moment of my life, but it was also the moment I took my power back and refused to be treated as less than, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Emma is 3 months old now, and she's thriving. Mark and I are stronger than ever. We've moved to a new house in a different neighborhood to get some distance from his family and start fresh. We're building our own family traditions and our own life. Patricia sees Emma once a week for supervised visits, and she's been on her best behavior. Richard sees her less frequently. My parents are wonderfully involved grandparents who actually respect boundaries and treat me with love. It's not perfect, but it's honest and it's ours. And after everything that happened, I value honesty above almost anything else. No more secrets, no more lies, just truth even when it's hard. That's the life I want for my daughter. That's the example I want to set. Stand up for yourself, demand respect, and never let anyone make you feel small. That's what I did that day at the baby shower, and I'll teach Emma to do the same.